I had always prided myself on being honest, hardworking, and dependable. I spent years building my reputation in the office, earning respect from my colleagues, and working my way up in a company that I believed in. But everything changed in an instant. Everything I worked for, everything I trusted, was ripped away from me in one devastating accusation. It started on an ordinary Wednesday. The office was buzzing as usual, everyone wrapped up in their own work, when the HR manager, Mr. Dawson, called me into his office. I had no reason to suspect anything. After all, I had never been in trouble at work, and I had a clean record. But when I walked into that room, I was hit with a cold wave of confusion. "Amelia," he began, his voice flat, "we've been reviewing some security footage, and it appears that you've taken something from the company, a very valuable item." My stomach dropped. "What? That's ridiculous," I said, my voice shaking. "I haven't taken anything." He slid a piece of paper across the desk to me. On it was a description of a missing company laptop, an item I had never even seen before. "We have footage of you near the storage room where the item was kept," Mr. Dawson continued, his eyes avoiding mine. "Amelia, this is serious. We're going to have to suspend you while we investigate." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're accusing me of stealing? I've never even touched it." My voice rose in disbelief, but he didn't budge. The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming. How could they think I would do something like this? I had worked hard for my position and respected the company's values. But now they were looking at me like a criminal. The more I protested, the more the room felt colder. In their eyes, I was already guilty, and no one seemed willing to listen. That day, I was suspended without pay, and I had to leave the office in front of everyone. The whispers started almost immediately, and my mind raced. I knew I hadn't stolen anything, but the damage had already been done. My reputation, everything I had worked for, was crumbling. People started treating me differently. Some didn't meet my eyes. Others whispered behind my back. It was like I was invisible, except for the accusations hanging over me. I was furious, humiliated, and confused. But mostly, I was determined to prove my innocence. I knew the truth, but it didn't matter. The company had already made its decision, and they weren't going to let me off easily. That night, as I sat in my apartment, replaying the events of the day over and over in my mind, something shifted. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I wasn't just going to walk away with my tail between my legs pretending it never happened. No, they had made a mistake, one that would cost them, and I would make sure they knew exactly who they were messing with. I wasn't going to fight them with words or legal threats. No, I would show them what happens when you falsely accuse someone who knows how to fight back. I spent hours plotting my revenge, not just for the humiliation they caused me, but for the injustice of it all. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to make them regret ever doubting me. I'd always been taught that revenge was a dangerous game, one that could consume you. But this wasn't about petty revenge. This was about showing them that you couldn't mess with me and get away with it. This was about making them realize that I wasn't just some powerless victim. They had no idea what I was capable of. It would take time, careful planning, and patience. But when the moment came, I was going to take them down in a way they never saw coming. The next few days were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. I couldn't stop thinking about how my life had been turned upside down in such a short period of time. My phone rang constantly with messages from friends and family, all of them expressing their support. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter how many people believed in me. It wasn't the same as clearing my name. The truth was, I was alone in this fight, and I had to take matters into my own hands. I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for the investigation to unfold. The way the company had treated me, suspending me without even hearing my side, had already proven that they weren't on my side. They had made up their minds, and no matter what I said or did, I was already labeled as guilty. It wasn't just about my career anymore. It was about making them understand the consequences of their actions. They couldn't just tarnish my reputation and expect me to let it slide. I decided that I needed to act fast. The longer I waited, the more I would seem like a passive victim. I wasn't going to let them think they could push me around without any repercussions. But how? How was I going to get back at them without making it obvious that I was the one pulling the strings? The first thing I did was focus on gathering evidence. I knew that if I was going to prove my innocence, I had to go straight to the source. The company had cameras everywhere. Security cameras, office surveillance, even footage from the parking lot. I needed access to those cameras. But there was one problem. I no longer had access to the office. I couldn't just walk in and request footage from the security team. I had been banned from the premises, but that didn't mean there weren't other ways in. I reached out to an old friend of mine, Lucas, who worked in the IT department. We had become close during our time working together at the company, and I knew he was the kind of person who would be able to help me. After a few texts and a quick phone call, we arranged to meet at a cafe later that evening. When I walked into the cafe, Lucas was already sitting at a corner booth, nervously glancing around. He hadn't changed much since we last saw each other, but I could tell he was still a little on edge, his hands shaking as he stirred his coffee. "I know you're not the kind of person to just sit back and let things happen, Amelia," Lucas said, his voice low. "But are you sure about this? If you get caught, it's over. I don't want to be involved in anything that could get me into trouble." I sat down across from him, looking him in the eye. "I need your help, Lucas. You know I didn't do this. I don't care if they're going to sweep it under the rug. I'm not letting them get away with it. I just need the evidence." He hesitated for a long moment, but then finally sighed and nodded. "All right, but I'm only helping you because I know you didn't steal anything. I'll get you access to the footage, but you have to promise me you won't do anything stupid." I nodded, my heart racing. "I won't. I just need to prove it." Over the next few days, Lucas helped me secretly retrieve the footage from the security cameras. He was able to hack into the system and send me the files I needed. When I finally sat down to watch the footage, my stomach turned. There I was, walking past the storage room just like they had said. But there was no theft, no shady behavior. I had simply been walking to my desk, completely unaware that the security team was keeping an eye on me. It was clear there was no evidence that I had stolen anything. This was the proof I needed. But I wasn't done yet. I knew that I had to expose the people who had falsely accused me, and to do that, I needed leverage. The company had been careless in how they handled the situation. They had assumed I was guilty before even considering the facts. It was time to turn the tables. I spent the next few days carefully crafting my next move. I reached out to a few employees who had witnessed the way I was treated. People who had seen the way I was unfairly suspended without cause. They were all afraid to speak out, fearing repercussions from the higher-ups. But I wasn't. And I wasn't afraid of the company either. I had already lost everything I had worked for. Now it was time to take back control. I started gathering statements, testimonials, and other documentation that would show how the company had mishandled the entire situation. I didn't just want to clear my name. I wanted to make them pay for everything they had put me through. But I wasn't going to do it with anger or rage. No, I was going to do it with cold, calculated precision. And when the time was right, I would make sure they knew exactly who had exposed their lies, their manipulation, and their greed. Revenge wasn't just about making them feel sorry for what they did. It was about showing them the power of someone they underestimated. It was about making them understand that you can only push someone so far before they decide to fight back in the most unexpected way. The days following my meeting with Lucas were filled with a heightened sense of purpose. The footage, the statements, everything was coming together. But it still wasn't enough. I had what I needed to expose the company for the wrongful accusation, but it was about timing, about making sure they felt the full weight of their mistake. I spent hours drafting emails, gathering all the proof I had, footage, documents, statements from employees, and even my own detailed account of the events. But I couldn't just send this to the HR department or to anyone inside the company. That would be too easy. They were the ones who had gotten me suspended in the first place. No, I needed to hit them where it hurt, where they couldn't ignore me. I reached out to a powerful lawyer I had met a few years back. She was known for her ability to handle corporate cases, and I knew she could help me navigate this. We scheduled a meeting the next day, and by the time I stepped into her office, I could feel my hands shaking with anticipation. This was the moment I had been working toward, the moment I would begin to turn the tide in my favor. Amelia. She greeted me with a calm, steady gaze. What are we dealing with today? I sat across from her, handing over my folder filled with all the evidence I had gathered. I've been falsely accused of theft by my company. I've got proof that I didn't do it, but I need help making them pay for what they've done to me. Her eyes narrowed as she flipped through the pages. She didn't speak for a long time, just absorbed the information in front of her. Finally, she looked up at me, her face unreadable. You've done the hard part, gathering all of this. Now it's about strategy. We can go to court if you want, but I suggest we give them one last chance to settle before we escalate things further. I thought for a moment. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about making them regret what they did. No, I said, my voice firm. I want them to feel it. I want to hit them where it hurts, and I don't think they'll settle unless they're forced to. She smiled, a hint of approval in her eyes. I like your spirit. We can make this happen, but we'll need to make sure they understand the consequences. This is not something they can walk away from. Over the next few days, we crafted a plan. My lawyer drafted a formal letter to the company, warning them of a public lawsuit if they didn't act quickly to resolve the issue. The letter highlighted everything: the wrongful accusation, the damage to my reputation, and the way I had been treated without due process. The threat was clear. If they didn't make things right, I would make sure the entire world knew what they had done. I would take my case to the press and expose everything for what it was: an unjust, humiliating smear. I had never considered going public before, but I realized that this was the only way to make them pay. They had used their power to break me down. Now I would use my voice to tear them apart. I held my breath as I waited for their response. I knew that sending the letter was a gamble, but it was the only option I had left. If they thought I would back down, they were in for a rude awakening. The next morning, I received an email from the company's legal department. The tone was apologetic, though carefully worded, and they offered to discuss the situation in person. They wanted to meet with me to resolve things before the matter escalated further. I couldn't help but feel a surge of victory. They were rattled. They were scared. They knew they had messed up, and they were trying to salvage what was left of their reputation before I could expose everything. I agreed to meet with them, but I wasn't going in there to play nice. This was my chance to take control. I showed up early, walking into their conference room with my head held high, fully aware of the power I now had. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one in charge. As the executives filed in, they exchanged nervous glances, clearly unsure of how to approach me. I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew what I was capable of, and now they were about to find out just how much I had planned. Amelia, the HR manager began, his voice shaking slightly. We understand that you've been going through a difficult time, and we'd like to resolve this issue amicably. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. I don't want an apology. I want justice. I want you to admit that you wrongfully accused me, and I want you to fix the damage you've caused to my career and reputation. They tried to backpedal, offering empty apologies and excuses, but I wasn't interested in their words anymore. I knew exactly what I wanted, and I wasn't going to leave this room until I had it. I'll be taking legal action, I said, my voice cold and firm. And I will make sure this goes public unless I receive a full and fair settlement. This isn't just about clearing my name. It's about showing the world that you can't just treat people like this and get away with it. The room fell silent. The tension was thick, and I knew that I had finally taken the upper hand. They had underestimated me, and now they were about to realize that underestimating me was the biggest mistake they had ever made. The days following my meeting with the company executives were some of the most intense I had ever experienced. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something huge, something that could either make or break me. I knew the company had to respond soon, and I was prepared for whatever they threw my way. I had already made my decision. There was no turning back now. The following morning, I received a call from the company's legal team. The tone of their voice was markedly different than before. There was no more bravado, no more dismissiveness. They were now polite, careful. They asked to meet with me again, but this time they promised something different. They wanted to offer a settlement. The word settlement hung in the air like a lifeline, but I wasn't fooled. I had come this far, and I wasn't about to accept some half-hearted apology and a small payout just to make it go away. I had worked too hard for this, too many hours, too many sacrifices, and I had already been humiliated once. No, I wasn't just going to take the money and walk away. I needed more. I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions. I wanted them to know what it felt like to lose everything over a lie. When I walked into the meeting, the atmosphere was tense. The executives were seated around a large conference table, and I could see that they were all on edge. They were dressed in their usual business attire, but there was something different about them, something that made them seem less confident, almost desperate. Amelia, the lead attorney began, his voice a little shaky. We've reviewed the evidence you've provided, and we acknowledge that there were mistakes made on our part. We are deeply sorry for the way this situation was handled, and we want to make things right. We are prepared to offer you a settlement. I didn't let him finish. A settlement? I said, leaning forward, my voice sharp. You think a settlement is going to fix what you've done? You think a check can erase the damage you've caused? The attorney shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing nervously at the others. We understand that money can't undo the harm, but this is the quickest way to resolve this issue without further litigation or public attention." I crossed my arms and stared at them, my mind racing. This wasn't about money. This wasn't even about proving my innocence anymore. It was about justice. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to be falsely accused, to lose everything you've worked for because of someone else's negligence. I wanted them to know that the consequences of their actions didn't just affect me. They had consequences for them too. "No, I'm not taking a settlement," I said, my voice unwavering. "What I want is for you to admit publicly that I was wrongfully accused. I want a formal apology from the company, not just a bunch of legal jargon buried in a document. I want this on record for everyone to see." The room went quiet. The executives exchanged nervous glances, and I could see that they weren't ready for this. They had underestimated me, thinking that a quick payoff would get me to drop the case. But I wasn't interested in running away anymore. I was standing my ground. I had already been knocked down once, but I wasn't going to let them do it again. "We can't do that," the attorney said, his voice trembling. "It would be bad for the company's image. The board wouldn't approve of making such a public statement." I leaned in closer, my voice cold. "Then I'll go public myself. I'll take this to the media, and I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. You can try to hide behind your corporate shield, but you won't be able to run from the consequences. I'll make sure that every person who's ever worked for you knows what kind of company you really are." The room was silent again, the tension thick in the air. I could see that they were rattled. They had never expected this. They thought they could buy me off and make the whole thing go away. But I wasn't the same person I was when they first accused me. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't intimidated by their power or their money. I had a voice, and I was going to use it. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the lead attorney sighed. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "I want you to admit that you were wrong. I want you to fix the damage you've done, not just to me, but to anyone who has been wronged by your company. I want you to learn what it means to take responsibility for your actions." I could see that they were cornered. They had no choice but to listen to me now. It wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about taking back control. It was about showing them that there were consequences for treating people like they didn't matter. After a long pause, the attorney finally spoke again. We will discuss this with the board," he said reluctantly. "We will consider what you've said, but understand this is a big step for the company. We need time." I nodded. "Take all the time you need, but know this: I won't back down, not until I get what I deserve." As I walked out of the meeting, I felt a rush of satisfaction. The ball was now in their court, but I knew I had made my point. No matter what happened next, I had taken control of the situation. I had turned the tables, and I wasn't going to let them forget it. The next few days felt like they stretched on forever. My mind was constantly running through every possible scenario. The company had promised to discuss the situation with the board, but I knew that they were stalling. They didn't want to admit that they were wrong, that they had misjudged me and taken away everything I had worked for. I knew they were weighing the cost of doing the right thing versus the cost of covering up their mistake. In the meantime, I had to stay sharp. The last thing I wanted was to let my guard down. I had already come so far, and I couldn't afford to lose my momentum. My lawyer and I stayed in constant communication, and I continued to gather evidence, speaking with more employees who were willing to share their experiences. I needed to be ready for whatever they threw at me next, and I wasn't about to back down now. The media pressure had already begun to mount. Word had spread about the wrongful accusations, and local news outlets started picking up the story. The company, once the towering behemoth that everyone looked up to, was now under scrutiny. Articles were being written about corporate injustice, about the mistreatment of employees, about how they had allowed someone to be publicly humiliated without a second thought. It felt empowering. I knew that the more attention this got, the harder it would be for them to sweep it under the rug. Then, finally, came the call. It was from the company's legal department, but this time there was no hostility, no dismissiveness in their tone. It was different. I could hear the urgency in the lawyer's voice as he spoke. "We've discussed your demands with the board," he said, "and we're willing to meet you halfway. We've come up with a solution that we think will resolve the matter without further escalation. We're prepared to make a public apology and reinstate you with full compensation for the time you've lost. However, there are conditions." I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over me. I had expected a fight, but I had no idea how far they would go to avoid a public scandal. "What are the conditions?" I asked, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. "We want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement," the lawyer continued. "We'll keep the terms of the settlement private, and you won't be able to discuss the details of this agreement with anyone. We'll also remove the investigation from your record, but you'll have to agree not to seek any legal action moving forward." I sat silently for a moment, taking it all in. The offer was tempting, and in any other circumstance it might have been enough. But this wasn't just about money or getting my job back. This was about principle. They had taken something from me that wasn't theirs to take. They had humiliated me, stripped me of my dignity, and tried to destroy my reputation for something I didn't do. If I signed that NDA, I would be silencing myself, and I wasn't going to do that. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I won't sign any agreement that silences me. I won't let you sweep this under the rug just to protect your image. I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing this because what you did was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend it never happened." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the lawyer sigh, as though he had expected this answer. "Amelia, I understand your position, but you need to understand the consequences. If this goes public, it will ruin the company's reputation. There will be legal consequences, and we will fight you on this. It's not going to be easy." "I'm not afraid of you," I replied coldly. "You thought I was an easy target. You thought you could just destroy my life without any consequences. But I'm not going to back down. I'm going to make sure the world knows what kind of company you really are. And if you want to fight me, then let's go. But know this, I will expose you for what you did." After a tense silence, the lawyer finally spoke. "We'll take your demands to the board again. We'll discuss the next steps, but we can't promise anything." I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I knew I had made the right decision. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving to myself that I could stand up for what was right, no matter how big the corporation or how impossible the odds. That night, I spent hours preparing for what was next. I reached out to the media outlets that had been covering my story and told them I was ready to go public with everything. The company had underestimated me, but now I was going to turn the tables once again. I wasn't just fighting for my job anymore. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for something much bigger than that. I was fighting for the truth, for the people who had been silenced, and for everyone who had ever been wronged by a system that didn't care. I was ready to make them regret ever thinking they could break me. The days that followed were filled with constant anticipation. Every time my phone rang, I braced myself for another attempt from the company to persuade me to accept their terms. I knew they were getting desperate. The media coverage was growing, and the pressure was mounting. Their clean corporate image was starting to crack, and they didn't know how far I was willing to push. I was ready to take this to the next level, but I also knew I had to remain strategic. As I sat in my apartment, reviewing my options, I realized that this wasn't just about getting revenge, it was about exposing the truth. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for anyone who had ever been falsely accused, anyone who had been silenced by the corporate machine. I knew that if I went public with my story, it would resonate with so many others who had suffered in silence. This was bigger than me. This was a fight for justice. Then the call came. It was from the company's legal department again, but this time their tone was different. The lawyer seemed almost defeated. "Amelia," he began, his voice heavy, "we've reviewed your demands with the board, and we've come to a decision. We're willing to offer you a public apology, and we will clear your name from the company's records. But we cannot agree to your request for a full public statement. We're offering a private settlement." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I had gone through, after everything I had fought for, they were still trying to sweep it under the rug. I wasn't going to let them do it. I knew that I couldn't walk away from this without making them truly understand the consequences of their actions. "I don't want a private settlement," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I want the world to know what you did. I want everyone to see how you've tried to destroy me. You think this is over? It's not over until you fully admit what you did, and until you make it right, not just with me, but with everyone who's been wronged by this company." There was a long pause. I could hear the lawyer shuffling papers on the other end, likely trying to figure out how to spin this into something that wouldn't blow up in their faces. "Amelia, we're offering you a fair deal here. A public statement could cause irreparable harm to the company. We're asking you to reconsider." I could hear the desperation in his voice, but I wasn't swayed. "I'm not asking for your permission. I'm going to the media, and I'm going to make sure the world knows the truth. You've already ruined my life once. I'm not going to let you do it again." The lawyer sighed. "I'll pass your response on to the board, but know that if you go public, there will be no turning back." "That's the point," I said, my voice colder than ever. "You don't get to control me anymore. I'm taking back what's mine." I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of satisfaction and adrenaline. I had made my choice. There was no turning back now. But I couldn't act rashly. I had to be careful. This was the moment where everything would either fall into place or the stakes would get even higher. I needed to make sure the world knew what had happened without jeopardizing my position. The following week, I reached out to several investigative journalists who had covered corporate misconduct in the past. I shared my story with them, providing them with all the evidence I had: footage, emails, the testimony from employees who had witnessed the mistreatment. They were eager to take the story and run with it. I knew that if this went public, it would be impossible for the company to ignore. The journalists worked fast, and within days, my story hit the headlines. The company's name was now in the spotlight, and they couldn't hide from the truth anymore. The public apology they had offered me was nothing compared to the storm that was about to hit. As the news spread, The company was forced to acknowledge their role in the scandal. Their reputation, built over years of corporate power, was now crumbling under the weight of their own mistakes. It wasn't long before I received another call from their legal team. This time there was no negotiation, no more empty promises. They knew they were losing control. "We've been in touch with our PR team," the lawyer said, his voice now pleading. "We'll do whatever it takes to make this go away. We'll offer you the apology you want, and we'll make sure it's public. Just please, stop the media storm." I could hear the desperation in his voice, and it felt like a small victory. The company had underestimated me, and now they were at my mercy. But I wasn't interested in their empty apologies anymore. What mattered was that they had been exposed for what they really were. "I'll accept your apology," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But understand this. The damage you've caused isn't something that can be fixed with words. You've already lost my trust. And now the world knows exactly what kind of company you are." The next day, the company released a full public apology, admitting their role in the wrongful accusation and clearing my name. It wasn't the victory I had dreamed of, but it was enough. The world knew the truth. The company had been forced to face the consequences of their actions. And as for me, I had taken back my power. I had shown them that you can only push someone so far before they fight back. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming my life and my dignity, and I had done it on my own terms. The weeks after the media storm were a blur of mixed emotions. I had gotten what I wanted. The company had issued their public apology, clearing my name, but that wasn't the end of the story. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, but there was still a gnawing sense of disbelief. How had I gone from being an employee with a bright future to being accused of something I didn't do? And more importantly, how could the people I trusted in the company allow this to happen? Despite the company's attempts to salvage their reputation was forever changed. The media coverage had spread like wildfire, with stories detailing the wrongful accusations, corporate mismanagement, and how they tried to cover it up. I was no longer just a name in the news. I had become a symbol of what could happen when power was abused, when the voices of the innocent were ignored. I had expected a sense of satisfaction, but it came with an unexpected emptiness. The apology, the public acknowledgement, and the vindication were important, but the whole ordeal had left a scar. It was a reminder that no matter how much you work to be a good person, to do things the right way, others can still tear you down with a lie. I wasn't just fighting for my career anymore. I was fighting to reclaim my belief in justice. And in the process, I had learned that the pursuit of truth came at a price. The company's actions had consequences far beyond the public backlash. In the weeks that followed, I saw a shift in the corporate world around me. People who had once whispered behind my back, saying I was guilty, speculating on my actions, now came to me with an entirely different look in their eyes. The whispers had stopped, but something else had started to emerge. Respect. I had been the underdog, falsely accused and humiliated, but now I was standing on my own 2 feet. I wasn't going to let this define me. I was determined to use this experience as a platform to speak out about workplace injustices. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a fight for everyone who had ever been wronged in silence. I took the opportunity to step into the public eye and share my story with others. I worked with journalists who were committed to exposing workplace abuse, and I started talking about how power dynamics in the workplace often favored the guilty and punished the innocent. I began attending speaking engagements, sharing my personal experience of how my life had been torn apart by corporate greed and negligence. It was in these moments that I realized something incredible. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I had transformed into a voice for others who had been overlooked, ignored, or accused without cause. And as I spoke, I saw how deeply my story resonated with people. The messages, the comments, the emails, they kept coming, each one from someone who had been through something similar, someone who had been silenced or falsely accused. My mom, who had been by my side through this all, was amazed by the change she saw in me. She had always been proud of my success in the corporate world, but now she saw me not just as her daughter, but as someone who had found her true strength. We had grown closer, and there was a new sense of respect between us that I hadn't imagined before. She had always been cautious, protective, but now she was truly seeing me as a woman who could stand on her own, no matter what life threw her way. As my story continued to spread, more people reached out. Those who had been wronged, those who had been in positions of power and felt helpless. It was then that I realized that the hardest part wasn't the fight itself. It was learning to forgive. The anger that had driven me, the desire for revenge, had started to fade. I didn't need to punish the company anymore. What mattered now was what I did with my newfound platform. I had become a symbol of resilience, and that was far more valuable than any apology or compensation. The fight wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for what was right. It was about empowering others to speak out, to fight for justice, and to trust that they could overcome any obstacle, no matter how impossible it seemed. The company's apology didn't fix the damage they had done, but it did offer closure. I didn't need them to admit their wrongs anymore. I had taken my power back, and that was enough. But the most important lesson of all, the greatest revenge, wasn't in making them suffer for what they did to me. It was in showing them that I could rise above their lies. And in doing so, I found a sense of peace I never thought I'd achieve. In the months that followed, I found myself walking a path I never imagined. The fight for my dignity and my career had been hard, but the journey that came after was even more transformative than I could have ever anticipated. The aftermath of the wrongful accusation, the media coverage, and the public apology from the company had left a lasting impact on both my life and the company's. But what really began to change was the way I saw myself. For so long, I had been the person who tried to fit in, who worked tirelessly to prove her worth to others. The unjust accusation had shattered everything I knew, but in its wake, it allowed me to rebuild, not just my career, but my sense of self. I wasn't the same person I had been when all of this began. I had learned so much about resilience, about standing up for what was right, and about finding strength even in the darkest times. The media coverage had slowed down, but the stories of workplace injustice continued. I received messages from people all over the country, sharing their own experiences of being accused without evidence, of being ignored or pushed aside by the very companies they worked for. It became clear to me that this was not an isolated incident. There were so many people, men and women, who had been silenced, their voices and truth dismissed. And I realized that I had a responsibility to continue this fight. I began to focus more on advocacy, I started working with organizations that helped people who were falsely accused or wronged by their employers. It became my mission to help others find their voice, to show them that they could fight back and win. I would share my story, but more importantly, I would give them the tools and resources to help them navigate the complex world of workplace justice. As I grew more involved in these causes, I was invited to speak at events, to participate in panels, and to contribute to articles about workplace injustice. I became a voice for those who had been unfairly treated, and in doing so, I found a sense of purpose that went far beyond proving a point to my former employer. I realized that the power of my experience wasn't in the victory of clearing my name. It was in the way I could use it to create positive change for others. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. Every time I spoke publicly, I could feel the weight of my past. The memories of being accused, of sitting in that cold, sterile office with no one to defend me, would still flash in my mind. There were times when I wanted to walk away, to leave it all behind, but then I'd hear from someone who had been inspired by my story, someone who had found the courage to speak out because of what I had done. And that's when I knew I couldn't stop. I kept hearing from people who thanked me for showing them that it was okay to stand up for what was right, even if it meant facing resistance or rejection. Many of them were women who had been silenced in their own workplaces, or men who had been falsely accused, and my story gave them the courage to speak out. That's when it hit me. My story had become a tool for empowerment. It was no longer just about seeking justice for myself. It was about giving others the opportunity to claim their own justice. One of the most unexpected outcomes of my journey was how it reshaped my relationship with my mother. When the accusation first happened, she had been the one who was most concerned, the one who didn't believe the company would do such a thing. But as time passed, and as I proved myself, I saw a change in her too. She stopped seeing me as the person who needed protection and started seeing me as a woman who could fight her own battles. She became my greatest ally, and in many ways our relationship deepened. She was no longer just my mother. She had become my equal, my partner in this fight. And then there were the moments when I would simply reflect on everything that had happened. I would think about how far I had come, how much I had learned about strength, resilience, and the true meaning of justice. There was a time when I would have seen my career as the pinnacle of my worth. But now, I saw it as only one part of the greater picture. The real achievement was the person I had become, the person who could stand up for herself, who could face adversity head on, and who could turn an experience of betrayal into something that not only healed her, but helped others in the process. In the end, what I realized was this: true strength comes not from avoiding the trials life throws at you, but from facing them, rising above them, and using them to fuel the change you wish to see in the world. The company had tried to tear me down, but in the process, they had unknowingly built me up into someone far stronger than I ever thought I could be. As time passed, the dust slowly settled. My life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. But there was a new feeling in the air, a sense of empowerment that I hadn't known before. I had fought a battle I never asked for, but in the end, I had won not only my reputation, but also a newfound purpose. The company, despite their best efforts to move on, had suffered the consequences. Their public image had been forever tainted. The employees who had once been loyal now looked at them with skepticism, and the trust they had worked so hard to build crumbled under the weight of their own mistakes. I watched as their stock prices dipped, as the media coverage continued to dig into their corporate culture. I didn't revel in their downfall. In fact, I felt a certain sadness. All of this could have been avoided if they had simply done the right thing in the first place. But that was their lesson to learn, not mine. What I had learned, though, was something far more important. You can't control the actions of others, but you can control how you respond. No matter what life throws your way, you always have a choice. You can either let it break you, or you can rise stronger than ever before. I had chosen to rise. A few months after the settlement was reached, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at a major corporate ethics conference. It was an opportunity I never thought I would get, but I knew it was my moment to share everything I had learned, not just about standing up for yourself, but about creating a culture of accountability and justice in the workplace. Standing in front of a crowd, telling my story to hundreds of people who had gathered to hear about the very issues I had been fighting for, felt surreal. I looked out into the audience and saw faces, some filled with admiration, others filled with hope. I knew that my journey had become bigger than just my personal revenge. It had become a catalyst for change. The thought of it brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt before. I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was sharing the power of standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. Never underestimate the power of standing up for yourself, I said as I closed my speech. The road to justice is not easy. It's filled with obstacles, doubt, and setbacks. But remember this: the only true victory is the one where you maintain your integrity, where you stand firm in your beliefs, and you continue the fight for what's right, no matter the cost. The applause was loud, but what hit me the hardest wasn't the standing ovation. It was the conversations I had with attendees after the speech, when they came up to me and shared their own stories of injustice. It was the recognition that I wasn't alone in this fight. And more importantly, I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, or falsely accused. Looking back on everything that had happened, I knew that the true power of my journey wasn't in seeking revenge or getting a public apology. It was in the lessons I learned along the way. It was in the strength I found within myself and the power of believing that no one, not even the most powerful corporations, could take away my dignity. The greatest revenge wasn't in making them pay for what they did to me. It was in showing them and the world that I could rise from the ashes stronger than ever. The true victory was in the peace I found, not in the destruction of my enemies. If you've enjoyed this story and want to hear more about personal journeys of strength, resilience, and the lessons that life throws our way, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on more powerful stories. Don't forget to share this story with anyone who needs a reminder of the power of standing up for what's right. Stay tuned for more, and remember, you're stronger than you think.